Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Dayhoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. I meet some other staff from SRBC, Jason Euler, General Counsel, for Policy Implementation and Outreach, and Gwen Rowland, Manager of Government and Public Affairs.
Can you? Yeah, hang on.
And sure, my introduction. This is Andrew Dayhoff, Susquehanna River Basin Commission, offered an hour on proposed rulemaking. Coming to you live from the Pennsylvania Municipal Authorities Association. We appreciate them hosting. I want to thank the Municipal League, Association of Boroughs, and the associations of both township commissioners and township supervisors for participating and for publicizing this webinar to the membership. Running through proposed rulemaking, opportunities for questions that we might answer. You submit your questions by typing them into the text box to the right of the screen. But please use the send to all panelists option so you can be assured that we will see the question and answer it. Any questions at any time, and answer them as appropriate. Just by introduction, and what prompted it. It's been over 10 years since the Commission last underwent comprehensive to our rules. Over that decade, we have noticed and noted several of improvement, things that consequences and other things we'd like to address. So to characterize this rulemaking, I would say it's necessarily anything new. It's not subjecting anyone to our regulations that isn't already subject to them, and there are additional requirements to gain SRBC approval, but rather characterize it as clarifications and to fill data gaps. We have undergone a very thorough with our commissioners about appropriate changes to the rules. Is what we've come up with, again, to really applications and adopting things that we're already doing. Have encouraged us to conduct extensive outreach to affected parties, and webinar is part of that. The proposal was first established or published in the Federal Register in September, shortly after the commissioners authorized staff to publish it. We have similar webinars in October, in addition to today's, and also met with several organizations. Period. This is the end of January. That will include comments written, and also we received at the hearings, 4 hearings that we held through the Basin. I'll turn it over to Jason Euler, General Counsel, to allow him to describe the rule.
Thank you and good morning. Those rules, as Drew pointed out, does several things. I've categorized them in 4 broad categories. The first is adding a new subpart to provide for the registration of grandfathered projects. The second is we're amending the rules dealing with the mitigation of consumptive uses, clarifying application requirements and standards for review of projects, and the requirements dealing with hearings, appeals, and enforcement actions. Cover in turn in various degrees of depth, but probably the one we'll cover, spend time on, because it is a new section, subpart added, is the registration of grandfathered projects. To start out, what might be helpful just to define what a grandfathered project is. You won't find that terminology used per se in the regulations. It comes through interpretation of regulations and the dates that are built into them. So grandfathered project is for a groundwater withdrawal, a withdrawal that was initiated prior to July 13th, 1978, when our groundwater regulations went into effect. Water withdrawal It's one ended prior to November 11th, 1995, when our surface water regulations went into effect. And the combination of sources deals with, our jurisdictional limit, and that rule into effect in January 1st, 2007. The project to be a grandfather project, it still has to be what we would call a jurisdictional project, meaning it has to be large enough of a withdrawal to our regulations. Our trigger is 100,000 gallons per day over a 30-day average for withdrawals, or in other words, 2 million gallons over in a 30-day period. If a project does not withdraw that much in a rolling 30-day period, not fall under the commission's jurisdiction and does not need to seek our review and approval, and therefore isn't a grandfather project exempt from our review and approval because it's too small. Projects do pose challenges for the commission and our management of the basin's water resources. They pose challenges in one, knowing who they are. The commission's rules don't require, to this point, haven't required registration for us to know who the grandfather projects are, how much water they're withdrawing or considerably using. They also pose challenges for establishing historical amounts of usage, as you see for some of those dates. Groundwater in 1978. We do grandfathering determinations now with projects, and it's a costly for them and us going back trying to reconstruct records that don't exist anymore, were destroyed in Agnes. We've, the got all that retired in 2001 and moved to Florida, and I'm not even sure they're still alive. These are all real things that we encounter, and it becomes sort of a historical exercise. The commission recently completed its comprehensive consumptive water use availability study, or QUAS. And we realized just the extent of the data gaps we have, and we estimate that we could have a total of perhaps as many as 760 grandfathered projects in the basin, with an estimated water usage of 970 million gallons per day. To put that in perspective, that usage amount matches what we have under review and approval, docket review and approval today. So it's quite water in the basin that we don't have good data on. To fill the data gaps, the Commission is proposing a new subcommittee in Chapter 806, proposing a registration project. It has corresponding changes in Section 806.4, 1, Roman numeral 3, and A2, Roman numeral 4. They have to do with what triggers review projects to trigger review and approval, and they have to change necessarily to accommodate the new concept of registration. With Section 806.40 that defines the scope of grandfathered projects, but that's essentially what I talked to you before. It's the date. It's a very date-centric thing. And also I would add in, it also includes consumptive uses. The grandfather date for consumptive uses is the date the compact went into effect, which is 1971. The JET project will have to operate above the applicable threshold in order to be a grandfathered project. A1 provides that a grandfather project must register with the Commission with 2 years in order to maintain its grandfathering exemption. To be clear, the grandfathering concept is an exemption from our rules. Projects that are grandfathered do not have to go through our project review and approval. For a grant project, that means they do not have to subject themselves to a for test plan, testing of the well for sustainability, and things that go along with review and approval under the Commission's regulations. First water source, so it means that they do not have to go through review and approval and look at the sustainability of the source and possibility of having a pass-by flow or load protection trigger. So this is still a regular exemption, but in order to maintain that exemption for grandfather projects, you have to register it. The Commission proposed a 2-year window, which is a long amount of time, but it wanted to sort of provide time for projects to be able to register, and also commission plenty of time to conduct extensive outreach to folks that may have this grandfathering exemption, and allow them for us to find them, inform them of the duration, and for them to take advantage of it. Projects may have lost their grandfathering exemption under the current regs. They had a change of ownership or added a new source, will not be eligible to register. So just take a step back to explain that the grandfathering is solely a creation of the Commission's regulation. But those regulations also provide mechanisms where a project could lose its grandfathered status. And an easy one to understand is if a project changes ownership. Grandfathering applies to the entity that had the grandfathering. If they sell or transfer their assets in the project over to someone else, the grandfathering exemption doesn't go with it. It's lost. So that's the registration process is not something that's meant to undo the existing regulatory structure for losing a grandfathering, but what essentially would be if someone would register with us and we realized that they had lost the exemption, we would convert the registration into our application process without, and they would be worrying about there being a compliance issue. Section 642 describes the needed elements for registration. This sounds essentially the project description, identification of sources, the current metering methods, quantity data for at least the most recent 5 years, any changes, and the project's requested grandfather quantity based upon the data presented. The idea behind this registration is for us, we were design it so that it wouldn't be necessary to even engage a consultant to fill out a registration form. It would be an online form and relatively easy to fill out. I've gotten a lot of questions on the most recent, the 5 years. Our focus is on recent data for a couple of reasons. One, the most recent data is more likely to exist, as opposed to looking at data that existed back in the 60s or 70s. Second, as I mentioned before, one of the problems with grandfathering as it exists in our current regs is we have to engage in this historical size that doesn't necessarily really get us a firm number that either the project or the Commission can count on, because just simply the data isn't there to make the kind of assessments of what the use really was. If an entity has 10, 15, 20 years of data and you want to submit that with the registration, the Commission consider that as well. There's not a limit to the amount of data you could submit, but we are looking for at least 5 years of data and working with the projects to provide the most recent 5 years. As I noted, the focusing on recent data increases the availability of data and also the reliability of the data to make a determination and avoids this, what a more costly historical evaluation to determine the project's historical withdrawals. The proposal also contains a new section, 80643, where the Commission will review the project's current metering and monitoring for its grandfathered withdrawals. And may require a project to follow a metering and monitoring plan to ensure that all quantities are accurate and reliable. The section also provides for ongoing reporting of quantities for grandfathered withdrawals. The Commission accept quantities reported under the requirements of the applicable member jurisdiction in lieu of additional data. And that's, for public water supplies, already reporting a lot to DP. Our goal is not to duplicate that and work with the EP. So hopefully there can be some scenes, IGs would make that as seamless as possible. New section 8644 provides the executive director shall determine the grandfather quantity for withdrawal based on the most recent data, the reliability and accuracy of the data, genuine reasonable usage, and other relevant factors. This is a determination to give us to give a project a firm number. They know that if they're going to start to withdraw above that point, they need to seek review and approval by the commission that the grandfathering exemption lost. And the determination is appealable to the commission under Part 808. And to take a step back and provide a little bit of broader context, the situation we're in now, there is one of the mechanisms that a project could lose grandfathering is that they increase the usage, for example, from a groundwater well. If they were, let's say, for example, 100,000 gallons a day in 1978, and that's their grandfathered amount. If they increase that usage by 100,000 gallons a day, so if they increase to 200,000 gallons a day, they would grandfathering and have to bring that well in. The problem is that most projects don't walk operating knowing exactly what their grandfathered usage was pre-1978. So sometimes they unintentionally exceed the trigger, and then it's later found out, and then it's now compliant. We've had several compliers where we found projects that have lost their grandfather status by exceeding the amount that they withdrew. The goal of this determination is to have a number certain so that there's administrative certainty and it becomes administratively final, like it's appealable. If it isn't appealed, it is administrative final to both the commission and to the project into the future, that you now have a number you can plan around and know when you would need to come in for commission relation, as opposed to possibly be caught unaware and in a compliance situation. And noted, the new part does require some tweaking of the current trigger review and approval triggers for consumptive use and for withdrawals. So a project a grandfather project will be subject to review and approval where a project that's registered under party increases its consumptive use amount above that was determined under the 806-44 process. So if it's determined your grandfathered amount is 200,000 gallons a day from a well, if you think you might be going above 200,000 gallons a day, you'll need to come in for review and approval, the determined grandfathered amount. A project that we right now be below threshold, that right now is too small to be jurisdictional. If it increases to the 100,000 gallon per day or more threshold, after this reg goes into effect, it would be required to come in. And fails to register as grandfathered consumptive withdrawal within the 2-year window provided under 806-41. So you have to register within the 2-year window in order to maintain your exemption. After that 2 years, you do not register it, the exemption is lost. So I'd say the getting away from the historical inquiry, assuming that a water supply incrementally has been increasing because they've getting more customers and there's been growth since 1978, they've been annually increasing their usage. It's not, the coming through these proposed rules is doing away with this historical. So the one pathway in which projects could lose grandfathering by increasing output by over 100,000 gallons a day from the grandfather amount goes away. We're no longer evaluating that because we're not even asking you what your 1978 usage was, because of all the problems inherent in just figuring out that number given it's 40 years past. So in that respect is you're going to be based on what your current usage is, even if it's above the 1988 usage. That any increase in usage inures to the benefit of the project in this regulation. Registration is a one-time event. There's not going to be registered every 5 years or 10 years or whatever. You register once and you're in, you get your number, and you manage it like anything else. The ongoing obligation of registration is to report the quantity of water withdrawn or consumptively used on an ongoing basis. Talk a bit about mitigation as it was included in the proposed rulemaking. First off, I'll say the This, the rulemaking that I'm talking about, that came in the proposal would have a 6 months after final publication, meaning that it won't affect right away if it's finally published in Federal Register, plus 6 months. This will allow the Commission time to do the that I had talked about, but also to develop sort of the IT infrastructure. We said we want to develop a relatively simple online registration process, and that takes some time to do. So the 2-year window to register won't start until 6 months after funding. So there's additional time for folks in this process. The Commission also anticipated that the cost of registration would be something that the community would have an interest in. So even though it's not part of the Commission doesn't set its fees in the rule, did set it forth in the rulemaking that in the resolution adopting this rule, they had also sort of adopt the fee schedule with it. And so what they proposed with that is in this 2-year registration window, if you register within the first 6 months, the registration fee is $0. Register within the second 6 months of the 2-year window, the fee would be $500. And do it during the last year of the 2-year window, the registration fee would be $1,000. For projects that are concerned about the cost of registration, there is, my advice is act within the first 6 months, and there won't be a fee implication. So a little bit about consumptive uses. I won't delve too deeply into it because the graph here is mostly focused on water supply. And so what I will say is if the current regulations that we have do not require review and approval for a class of projects, that you need to register for grandfathering purposes. So what does this mean for public water supply? Public supplies are not required to seek review and approval for consumptive use on Section 804A1, 806.4A1. Consumptive use, passes on to their customers that might be consumptive users if they're using it above the Commission threshold. So for public water supplies, you don't have to worry about consumptive use. You don't have to register it. Now currently under the regs doesn't require public water supplies to get review and approval for consumptive use or account for it. It doesn't change with this registration project. So the only thing that a public water supply would need to register with their water withdrawals, both surface and groundwater. My conclusion there is public water supplies would need only to register grandfathered withdrawals, not consumptive use. So with this, I didn't go into a lot of detail on the consumptive use side. Obviously projects that are not public water supply, industry, recreation activities, are going to have to also register consumptive use. You have to register both. We let you do one registration form. It'll be, it's not going to be multiple. Not too burdensome. So we do have the rulemaking. If you are interested, you look at some consumptive use mitigation changes in 806.22. So with this, put out a consumptive use mitigation policy companion to the rulemaking, and it describes the Commission's processes and policies in dealing with the, how to deal with mitigation and the mitigation plan require consumptive use. Again, that's not something public supply has to be concerned about, but I included just more so it's complete. And also, the policy also has a public comment period that ends January 30th. So turn to our project review standards, and there are some there, but I don't know that there's anything I would describe any as too earth-shattering in my view. The review regulations are revised. We're clarifying the aquifer testing requirements. We're adding contents of applications to our current practices. Providing flexibility for review withdrawals that are related to mining, construction, dewatering, or remediation. And we're also aligning our project review standards with application requirements. Section 612 clarifies that aquifer testing is applicable to new projects, renewals, and increases in water withdrawals. Section F is added to provide clear authority that the Commission can terminate review of an aquifer testing plan under 616 that currently exists if the applicant becomes unresponsive or fails to correct deficiencies. You'll notice is completely rewritten, is essentially hopefully to better align with our current application requirements. Those require items specific to each type of approval. So now you'll see it's a little bit more expansive, but instead of just shoehorning all the requirements into 1 and 2 sections, it's for generally applications, then water withdrawal applications, surface applications, some use and diversion. So each application is broken up by the different things that they might need. So it reads clearer and is more accessible to folks, depending on the type of product that they're taking. So none of them are really substantive changes from what we do now, except for what I'm going to say next. For water withdrawals, an alternative analysis is proposed to be required in settings with a drainage area of 50 square miles or less, or with exceptional water quality. There is an alternative analysis requirement, but what it says is alternative analysis as determined by the Commission. So it's a case-by-case determination. Surface water withdrawals, the proposed making makes that determination for headwater settings and exceptional water quality settings. So I can anticipate some questions on that related to water supply. We state that the alternative analysis for public water supply, you're more, geographically restricted than, say, industry coming in, or, that has some flexibility on where they could site something. That's recognized. This application requirement isn't necessarily tailored to a problem we're seeing with public water supply siting and headwater frictional quality settings. But it does have a lot more flexibility and consequence for those industries that have the ability to, flexibility in where they site their activity. Related to standards for withdrawals is amended to clarify that the Commission can establish conditions based on the effect on groundwater and surface water availability, including consumptive uses. This affects wetlands with a defined term at 806.3. This is not already done in our current. It's just the elements are incorporated through interpretations of the other factors to include them. And they're important enough that we want to call them out with their own specific language. It actually will not change how your projects are currently reviewed by the Commission. It's reflective of our current process. We look at the effect on wetlands, which just we never expressly said wetlands, and we never defined them. Now we do, and that's established more clearly. The section also clarified to expressly include the Commission's practice of establishing and acquiring a total system owner projects. This is based on the really foreseeable need of system and existing regulatory language. And that's it for the project review standards. And the last broad section that I'd like to touch on, hearing, appeals, and enforcement. This is in our Part 808. We're in our Section 808.1 dealing with our hearings. 808A is now public hearings shall be held, and it lists where they're required to be held by our compact. And they're the must-hold hearings under our organic statute. And B is public hearings may be conducted in all other instances. I will note that we're not changes to how the Commission currently conducts its hearings. Right now, we have a hearing before a Commission meeting, and all projects that could come before the Commission meeting are subject to that hearing, so it will allow public comment to occur in that venue. planning on changing that. We think that practice that we've implemented in the past 5 years is working well. We have revised the notice requirements, 801C. We've updated the public hearing procedures in the remainder of the section to reflect our current practices. And things like recognize the existence of the internet. You know, it's a typically of reg kind of thing. Section 8.2 deals with appeals to the commission. And I'll say this from you know, a lawyer's perspective. So we have this what sort of kind of an odd non-mandatory appeal of the commission. It's so you may appeal to the commission, or you may appeal to federal court as provided by the compact. Take your pick. And not necessarily serve the commission extremely well, or appellants extremely well either. The commission doesn't have a, you know, like for example, a Pennsylvania Environmental Hearing Board. We don't have a red machinery to hear appeals, and we're appealing an action that the commissioners just took, say approving or disapproving a project. I view more as kind of like akin to a requiring. The judge has already decided, but you're saying, hey, are you sure? Sort of you know, you put folks a lot of process to have a decision maker who's already made a decision and bring their decision. It seems it's in those instances where the commission has made the decision, an adoption of docket. The compact provides it's appealable to federal court. That's where you get your sort of neutral arbiter, judge whether the commission acted correctly. You don't go back to the commission for that. Where you do mandatory appeal to the commissioners is for all actions undertaken by the executive director under the regulations. If you what we'll call delegated acts the director can take, those should be appealed to our board of commissioners and can be handled in a process that's probably less intensive than an appeal of a docket action. And so 8.2 is revised to sort of system. So where the board of commissioners themselves take an action, the appeal to federal court. Where the director takes an action that's delegated through the regulations, that goes to the commissioners to have the ability to correct the executive director's action before it gets to the courts. Several revisions were made dealing with their compliance regulations that form the remainder of Part 8. The executive director to take action to correct and remedy enforcement matters. So the Commission has used staff directives. We formally recognize this practice now in 808.11. The executive director has the ability to issue all orders, including entering consent order agreements, which is the mechanism with which we resolve, I'd say, 99% of our enforcement actions. Determine the assessment of civil penalties under 808.15. This is the notice to show cause hearing. This is where, you know, the 0.5% of actions where we can't come to an agreement and enter a consent order. You have to go sort of that next step to make a formal assessment of civil penalties. Enter into settlement agreements for compliance matters. The authority right now, the resolution has allowed the executive director to enter into settlement agreements with parties for less than $10,000. This has been in place now for a little over 2 years. We find that's actually working well. It's making actually things go much more smoothly. And so this proposed making would have that be the rule to the exception, and the rule also allows the commissioners to carve out certain settlement agreements or types that would still have to come to them for approval. The civil penalty criteria under Section 808.16 are amended to include the punitive effect of a civil penalty. This sort of goes a couple of ways. You know, a lot of times. So, for example, we find a project that since, say, for example, you had a project that increased usage. It was a grandfather project, but it increased its usage and it lost grandfathering. And when it did that at some point, in 4 years prior, and was kept operating until, companies sort of caught up with it. So they've been operating out of compliance for 4 years. Under our staff compact, each day is a separate violation. So you have someone come to us with, 1,200 days of violation at a possible, minimum penalty of $50 a day to a maximum of $1,000, for operating out of non-compliance. What we normally find is that in those instances, add up all the days and do it. We want to be able to take into effect the punitive effect of the penalty. So for a small municipal authority, it may is the penalty itself, the amount like a $4,000 or $5,000 civil penalty, because then it's going to feel that punitive effect, as opposed to a large multinational company that might they might shake their attaché case and have $4 or $5 grand fall out, So we want to be able to sort of take the punitive effect of the penalty into account, to account for the size of the violator and sort of the nature of our violations that sometimes can span years. If we completed the minimum penalty for something that was out of compliance for 4 years and you come up with $550,000, it doesn't. We're trying to make the penalty fit the crime and the situation of the violator. And so adding this language hopefully will allow us to more cement the practice that we have. That's not really, that concept isn't really included in the factors, even though we take into account, because I consider it like sort of the reality of the world. So this is something that we've added to hopefully allow us to legally and lawfully do this practice. This concludes the formal part where I do all the talking, so we'll open it up to questions.
Well, thank you, Jason, for that overview, and I want to take a look at your attaché case later. We aren't really seeing that any questions have been submitted, so I'll give you a chance to type any in while I make some closing remarks. Again, this is as a reminder, you type them into the text box and submit, and only us here in the room will see them. We will read them and answer them to the best of our ability. As I mentioned we touched on the timeline, the fact that the rule would likely not be in effect for 6 months following adoption, but he did mention adoption may occur. The Commission meets quarterly to decide and take such actions as adopting new rules. Our next quarterly meeting is in March, but it is unlikely that we will be prepared to take any action, considering that the end of the comment period is January 30th. We're going to take some time to go through the comments and address those. So use the most likely first option as a June adoption of the rules, assuming that the commissioners are willing to go forward. Everyone's participation. We have recorded this webinar, and the recording will be made available on SRBC's website and PMA's website. I would remind you that the full text of the draft rule will be available on our website, www.srbc.net, and you'll also find information on how to submit comments. And again, review the deadline is January 30th, 2017. There's also information on who to contact in the event you have questions, and Jason's information is displayed on the screen now. The questions that have come in, so give us a chance to read those and offer a response.
We have a question that is asking about the rule change for identification, and will driver's licenses be barred from meetings in federal buildings since people have been coming to the meetings and the SRBC has changed its location? I will say that for SRBC meetings, the ID requirement, a properly issued state driver's license will be accepted. We have our hearings are mostly held in public, non-federal locations, and so so mostly they're held like the normal hearings for our business meetings are held in the state capitol in Harrisburg. So as far as I know, your driver's license ID is still sufficient to get through their security, and we won't have anything, we'll have additional requirements to that.
All right, once again, everybody for your participation, and we do a question.
The grandfathered permits rule have on sold Marcellus shale wells with consumptive use permits or water withdrawal sites. The grandfathering registration will have zero impact on the natural gas industry, simply because the date that industry came into effect was, in 2008 and after, when sort of most modern set of lines have come up. So they weren't in existence using water at the levels they were using prior to 1995 and 1978 and 1971. So none of the natural gas activity is grandfathered, just because of when the unconventional industry came into being.
Yeah, if I understand the question, if a Marcellus shale consumptive use permit or surface water withdrawal, if that is transferred to another company, we have an existing transfer regulation that simply allows it's a registration process, and that it simply tells who the new company is, and the bodies agree, and those approvals do transfer. Well, thank you again for your participation and interest, and hope everyone has a happy New Year.